point of this video is to provide a comprehensive breakdown of every single part of the Tracer 1v1 in order for you to understand how to take better duels. I'll be covering some of the niche mechanical tricks, but like the other Tracer video I've already made, I'm gonna assume that you're already really comfortable on the hero. So anyways, I'm gonna break the video down into some separate parts and I'm gonna leave timestamps. Okay, so before we start, there's a few different words that I'm gonna use in this video that aren't really super important, but they'll make explaining some of the concepts a lot more straightforward, so I'll just introduce them here. So the first term I'm gonna introduce is stack. So if you've played Quake at all before, you're probably pretty familiar with stack. Stack is essentially your character's cumulative resources, mainly health and armor. In the case of Tracer, when I say stack, I'm primarily gonna be referring to things like your health, the number of blinks you have, whether or not recall's on cooldown, your ult charge, how much ammo is in your clip, so on and so forth. Second term I'm gonna use is match, or I might say mirror as well. This one's pretty simple. When I say match or mirror, it essentially means that in the context of the duel, both players are doing or they're going to do the exact same thing. So without further ado, let's start. So we're gonna start with probably one of the most important parts of the Tracer 1v1, which is the ability to identify when and where you want to take a duel. And also, just as important, if not more important, recognizing when you want to avoid taking a duel. So the best way to think about this is to imagine that there are two Tracers with perfect aim and movement. In this case, how do we figure out who's gonna win? So the answer to this question is asymmetry in their stack and positioning. So what do I mean by this? Maybe the easiest way to see this is to take a really extreme example. So let's take two Tracers in a dead 1v1 on Eichenwald. So Tracer A is positioned here. She has full HP, full ammo, all her blinks. She has pulse bomb and recalls off cooldown. And for fun, let's just say she also has nano and I don't know, maybe Junker Queen just shouted her as well. Tracer B is positioned here. She has 30 HP. She just shot half of her clip. She only has one blink and she just used recall a few seconds ago. So my question for you is, if you had to bet $1,000 on which Tracer wins, what are you spending your $1,000 on? But in all seriousness, you know, Tracer A could be some random gold player, Tracer B could be proper having the best day of his life, and I think everyone would still probably take Tracer A any day of the week. Practically speaking, all this translates to essentially putting yourself in positions to take good duels when it's favorable for you to do so, as well as the converse, avoiding bad duels which are unfavorable for you. And it's always good to keep in mind that the other Tracer will also be trying to take engagements that are good for them and bad for you. Now let's talk more about the specifics of how to identify a good or bad duel. So let's start off with stack. This is arguably one of the most important parts of the 1v1, and it's gonna be your main cue to take or avoid an engagement. There's no need to overcomplicate this. Having a really large stack advantage lets you play way more aggressive and gives you way more room for error. Realistically, you won't be able to track every single blink or bullet they shoot, but you don't need to be Fixa to make a mental note if you see or hear the other Tracer burn recall, for example. It's good to look out for audio and visual cues like recall or double or triple blinks to help you determine if you have a stack advantage or not. So I can't overstate how important pack play is to the Tracer 1v1. You always want to be keeping track of where you and your opponent are relative to the health packs on the map, and whether they're up or not, and when they're going to respawn if they're not up. So try to pick engagements where you have better access to packs. I'll talk more about this later too in the third part of the video. So this one is pretty simple. Just don't fight the Tracer if she's Zen-orbed and there's an Ana free shooting her from somewhere. Likewise, it's very important to try and take advantage of your own team's resources. So what do I mean by this? Try to take duels where you have access to things like orb or brig packs, etc. A lot of people have this idea in their head that Tracer is this character that's really self-sufficient, so they don't really go out of their way to ask for resources from their team. But you really gotta trust me when I say that asking for resources can make a huge difference in the amount of impact you have on Tracer. Okay, this one is definitely way too broad to cover fully in this section. If you're interested, I do have another video on my channel dedicated to tracer positioning. It's more of a general video as opposed to the tracer 1v1. I'll just keep this part short and say try to play around areas that have good cover, easy routes to engage or disengage, and recall positioning is also very important. You want to make sure you have a safe place to recall to if that gets burned out. Also, high ground is always super OP. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of the duel. So all of the mechanics and the little tips and tricks you can use to your advantage during the duel. So let's start with one people tend to miss a lot of the time, which is effective range. Tracer's range is really finicky. So there's a certain breakpoint where if you're within this range, you do a lot of damage, and if you're even one step outside of the range, you do almost no damage. You really want to try your best to play around this range. You can do things like baiting your opponent to shoot at you from right outside of range, and then you blink in and dump your own clip. Another small detail I'll add is if the tracer doesn't know where you are and you're outside of your effective range, more often than not, it's actually better for you to just not shoot them at all. You might do like a bar to chip damage, but you're gonna give away your location and put yourself off cycle. So speaking of cycles, let's talk about that. When I say cycle, I'm referring to the cycle of tracer shooting and reloading. So for simplicity's sake, let's just say it takes like 2 seconds to fully empty your clip and 1 second reload. So the cycle might look something like this. And this is actually really important because this means that when you shoot every few seconds, there's this window of downtime where you're not really doing anything. So if I'm the one that's reloading, I want to be in cover to minimize the amount of damage I take, and likewise if the other tracer's reloading, then I can do things to take advantage of that, like I don't have to focus as much on my dodge and I can use my own movement to make aiming easier. So it's very important to be mindful of the shooting and reloading cycles and use them to your advantage when you can. Okay, speaking of movement, let's talk about blink usage. So there's way too much to go over here, but I think the most useful general tip I can give you is to try and have a purpose to each blink you use. This could be as simple as, closing the distance, forcing the engagement, trying to disengage, or even like blinking to peek a corner or beat the other tracer to a timing on a pack, etc., etc. So here's some of the more niche usages of blink that I think are worth mentioning during the duel. Okay, blink melee. So the damage is nice, but I mostly use blink melee as a movement mix-up to put my opponent off cycle. You'll see a lot of tracers, what they'll do is they'll instantly blink melee once they're in range and they see the other tracer, because most people tend to have this reaction where they just instantly shoot as soon as they see the other tracer. So this is a really easy way to make them miss a ton of shots and fuck up their cycle right from the get-go. Blink peeks. So this one's useful if the other tracer is playing a more passive position. They might be holding an angle on you, or they're trying to pre-fire you or predict your peek. You can get a small edge since your opponent has to readjust to your blink peek. Okay, bait peeks. So this is where you're gonna peek a corner, take a few shots, and draw their attention, and then instantly blink back into cover. If the other tracer likes to insta-blink melee, like I mentioned before, this is a really useful way to bait that out. As a final note on blinks, there's definitely a lot here, and it can be a bit overwhelming to think about all of this during a 1v1. So if you're looking for like a good general rule of thumb with blink usage, something that I like to do is if I know I have stack advantage, I'll just match the other tracer's blinks and go 1-for-1 with her. Cutting off rotations. This is really important if you have stack advantage since cooldowns recharge at the same rate for everyone. Put yourself between where the other tracer is and where they want to be. There are times in games where I will literally sit on top of a pack that hasn't spawned yet if I know that this is the closest pack for the other tracer and I want to control it. If you have stack advantage, one thing you can do is literally just walk at them to close distance and then match their blinks. Like I said before, cooldowns recharge at the same rate, so if you have more blinks or the same number of blinks, it's literally impossible for them to disengage using blinks if you position yourself correctly. Okay, masking movement. So this is definitely going to be the most micro part of the Tracer 1v1. If you've ever seen a high-level Tracer 1v1 before, you might have noticed that there are these funny little periods of time where both Tracers just kind of stand still and stare at each other. And that happens when both Tracers are on the same cycle and are reloading at the same time, and they're trying to master movement. So the essential idea behind this is that Tracer blinks are based on what movement key you're holding when you press blink. In other words, if I'm strafing to the right, the only way I can blink is right. If I wanted to blink left from this position, I'd have to change direction, which plays this really telegraphed animation. So you can mitigate this animation by taking advantage of small tricks to quote-unquote mask your movement. Standing still. So the easiest way to explain this one is just to look at the animations for changing direction versus acting out of a stationary position. To really drive this point home, which of these do you think is easier to react to? So Insta Blink out of direction change. This one is pretty self-explanatory. If you do this one fast enough, you can cut down on a lot of the animation time. And if you get really good at it, you can even juke people out. Blink out of air. So this one takes advantage of the fact that you don't have instant acceleration while in midair, so changes of direction are much harder to notice. Bait blinks. This one is very resource intensive, but also has the potential for a really big payoff. So this technique is essentially you telegraph your first blink really hard, and then right after you commit your first blink, you instantly blink back or blink somewhere else. Alright, so that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. If you'd like to see more videos like this, make sure to like and comment. I only really made this one since the reception for my last one was so good, and I really appreciate all the support that has gotten. But yeah, I hope you picked up something useful from this, and good luck in your games.